Hopefully everything works. Going live. All right, we're live now, Michael, and you're good to start.
All right. Welcome, 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 everyone. Welcome, friends. Welcome especially to our students and, of course, to your teachers and any school leaders or members of your school communities that might be joining us today. It's important as we start off that acknowledge that I don't really know exactly everyone who's tuned in. And so I don't want to assume that it's just students or that it's just students and teachers. In fact, as we're going to be talking about this morning and over the next few weeks, we want to expand our perspective when we are talking about what we know or we think we know. We want to deepen our understanding as well. And of course, we want to be accurate in terms of what we're talking about. And so that really means that I'm approaching today's session as all of our opportunities for learning in this challenge with an open mind and curiosity and really a sense of kind of fun and play. Remembrance Day can be, it's a very serious topic and can bring up a lot of emotions for people. But I think we can also enjoy ourselves while we engage in this learning together in community and reimagining Remembrance Day. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. My name is Michael Alex. I'm a teacher coach with the I Think team, and it's my pleasure to be here to host you for the 2023 Remembrance Day Challenge Kit launch. So giving you all a hand out there, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking part in the challenge. And today our purpose is really just to get our feet wet, just to give you an initial taste, students and staff, about what we're about in this challenge, the important work that we're going to get you undertaking for your school communities. And today, we may not answer all of your questions, but I really want to encourage the students specifically here. And so I'm shouting out to all of you, whether you are in grade 2 or grade 12, we really value your participation in this challenge. So the Remembrance Day Challenge Kit, and this is our second year that is offered through I Think, is here to offer you a couple of different things. One, students, we really want to engage you in real world problem solving. In other words, not something that you're doing and we just kind of like go through a process and maybe, create a project or some work and then, put it aside and forget about it. No, instead, with this process, with this challenge kit, what we're doing is working individually, working in pairs and partners, working in teams within our classes, and working across classes within our schools, and even across school communities within our larger boards. We've got schools here from across Toronto, from across the GTA. I'm shouting out to our Halton schools. Welcome, friends. To really reimagine and refocus on who and what and how we're celebrating and honoring sacrifice and service through our Remembrance Day ceremonies. So to start us off this morning, I'm going to just suggest to, and give you a moment to do this, to students out there, you may want to have a piece of pen and paper as we go through these exercises. And again, really, the purpose of today is not for you to be taking a whole bunch of notes, but you might be surprised. We've got a couple of exciting guest speakers. I'm really excited to share them with you. They've become friendly and if not friends with these people who have important stories to share from their perspective about how you might do this work as you move through the challenge. Okay, so if we've got pen and paper ready, and even if we don't, it's okay, we can pick it up after the fact. I would just encourage you, because you're going to be thinking big. We're going to be expanding our perspectives on who and what and how we remember over the course of the next month. And that, if it hasn't already started, and it may have started, I've heard from some of your teachers that you may have previewed some of our speakers' videos, including Jackson Heckenberg, who's one of our first speakers today, or perhaps Spencer Alexander, who's going to close out our session today. Both featured people in this year's challenge. You might want to jot down notes. You might have ideas that occur. Maybe one of the speakers says something, or in the classroom discussion that you're having on your end, perhaps, a classmate or your teacher says something that sparks something that you want to pick up on. And it might not even be today. It might be tomorrow or next week, or even next month, as we move deeper and deeper into reimagining how your school community celebrates and recognizes Remembrance Day. Okay, let's start with slide number 1. So as it says here, have a piece of paper and something to write or draw with. And I really want to encourage here, drawing is totally cool. Okay, it's a good way to go. So if we want to honor the fact that there are lots of different ways of learning and expressing ourselves. So if words make sense, awesome. If you want to draw some emojis, some symbols, that's totally cool too. All right. So let's just say quietly in our heads, okay, so using our internal voices 3 times, Remembrance Day. Remembrance Day. Remembrance Day. Okay. So now you don't need to look to the teacher, to any of your classmates for an answer. You're looking within your head, your heart. When you say Remembrance Day, what are 3 things to come to mind? Maybe jot those down. I'm going to give everyone a moment to do that. There are no wrong answers here, just what comes up. And when we remember, it might be a person or people. It might be a particular event, perhaps one that we've learned in school, like the Battle of Vimy Ridge, or Canadians who served, lived and died on the beaches of Dieppe. It could be veterans and active service members who served in Korea or in Afghanistan, or on one of the many peacekeeping missions or in support roles. It could be members of your family, of your local community. Or it might just be emotions or things that are personally relevant that maybe wouldn't make sense to others outside of your head. And that's okay too. And now maybe let's take a second moment and maybe turning, and I'm going to lean on the teachers out there in the audience to help guide with this. Literally just one moment and turning to a shoulder partner, so someone that is close to you, and sharing your 3 things to the extent that you're comfortable. Again, you always have the opportunity to pass. So if this was a personal recollection, you can just say, you know what, that's for me today, and that's okay. But otherwise, maybe sharing your three things, and then also being a good listener and letting your partner or partners share in turn. And so I'll give you a moment just to do that. Okay. And now we're going to move on. And I think, although I would love to, I mean, in a perfect world, we'd be able to hear from students all across the region about the different things that came up for them. If it's okay with you, I'm going to share the 3 things that came up for me. I've been thinking over this last, for my life, but over this last year, especially as I've worked I think, on the Remembrance Day Challenge, I've been thinking a lot about 3 things, and I really want to highlight them for all of you, because they're 3 touchstones that are going to guide your work through this challenge. The first group of people that I remember are those who we typically don't remember. In other words, I took a moment and thought about the fact that I grew up hearing particular stories about particular war experiences, and only that. Those stories tended to be people who looked and sounded a lot like me. And so today, I expand my understanding, expanding by including the faces, with or without names, of people from different ethnic backgrounds, from different family experiences, of different identities of all sort, whose stories I didn't grow up learning, but I've been learning since then, and that we'll be learning about this month. Secondly, I'm thinking about those that we do remember, but perhaps don't remember well. This could be name on a gravestone, but without any deeper knowledge of what this person's life was like, what made them tick, what did they feel when they were serving. And so here, we're deepening our understanding, moving beyond the superficial and going deeper. Finally, my third group is to think about stories that we get wrong. And it's okay to be wrong. I think sometimes we hear in school that it's only about getting the quote unquote right answer, which is the way to go. Not at all. sometimes, and in fact, often, we learn best by making mistakes and then integrating what we've learned from that mistake into our knowledge going forward. And those mistakes don't have to be anyone's fault. I'll give an example there. Who I'm thinking of is my grandfather, who served in the Second World War, or so I thought. And then in interviewing members of my family over the last number of years, my grandfather has since passed, I found out that in fact, he didn't serve in the war. And this was something that was difficult for me to understand because he had always walked with a limp, which he had explained as being a war injury. And in fact, I found out after the fact, again, by asking questions, by getting curious about my own family's history as an inroad into learning about war and remembrance. So I asked my aunts, I asked my uncles and my grandmother to tell me more about your experiences when you were younger, your experiences of war and peace and conflict. And in their case, migration, because they were coming to Canada. And what I heard was that the story that I'd always heard about my grandfather and his service was actually incorrect. He was embarrassed about the fact that he couldn't serve, and so spent all of his life telling a story that in fact was not true. And that's, again, not something to blame him for or feel shame about, but it's an interesting example of how when we dig a little bit deeper, sometimes we are able to correct our own historical misunderstandings. Okay, with that covered, let's move on. I want to begin more properly before we go deeper into the session by acknowledging the land and the Indigenous people who have lived on it for so long and continue to today. We acknowledge that we are being hosted on distinct and diverse traditional territories of the First Nations and Métis where we live. At I Think, we are on lands that are governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. The idea is that we can all peacefully live together in sharing this one dish, this land, and all that it provides, so long as we are mindful of only taking what we need. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Excellent. Okay. Moving on, I think it's important before we move any further, and really here, I'm hoping everyone's ears are perking up, especially because this is a particularly important message today. So I just want to make a note that in this challenge that you and your classes, your classmates, your teachers have taken on to design or redesign a Remembrance Day to make what's hopefully already memorable even more memorable, even more diverse in your expressions of who and what and how you remember. But we're going to be talking and learning about war, conflict, and peace. And we want to be clear that for people, for a variety of different reasons, exploring and reminiscing and thinking about these things, about the violence and so on that comes with war, can be difficult. It can raise a lot of challenging things for us. And so it's important to remember that you and your peers and the adults, and in fact, everyone, your families, your larger community, have diverse histories and diverse experiences with war and conflict. And although it doesn't say this on the slide, and I think we really believe strongly that everyone's story is a gift, but it's not one that we're entitled to. So there's an important word that I want to introduce, and we're going to be learning lots of different words, some military terminology as we move through the challenge, others about the learning process itself, and I hope interesting new terms like pro and ladder of inference and some of the language of the I Think integrative thinking process. But I really want, the word that I wanted to introduce to start us off today is, well, actually 3 words, if you will. One is sensitivity. We want to be sensitive to the fact that when we're talking about war and conflict, for some people, the emotions can be a lot to handle. And so we want to be sensitive to that, not pushing anyone, not pushing especially for them to share their stories or how they're feeling. And that can change moment to moment. Secondly, we want to treat one another and their stories, their families, with respect, which of course, as all human beings, we all deserve dignity and respect. And then finally, and this is the important word that I really wanted to come to, it's consent. And consent just means to ask permission, not to assume that we can do what we want because we want to. So we don't press someone to share a story that they might not feel comfortable with on a particular day or perhaps ever. That's okay. So we're moving forward with consent. And that would be working with your classmates. It might be interviewing a member of your family. It could be really anyone. Okay, that's just good practice as we move through this life. All right. So your challenge, should you choose to accept it, and I certainly hope that you will, So this will be the question that you and your classmates are working on over the course of the next month. And we are 1 month to the day away from Remembrance Day. So the question is, how might we, for you, help your school to design Remembrance Day to be meaningful to your school community? Okay. So in other words, this isn't like a project where we're just thinking about things. We're actually looking to act and to make some changes in our school community. Now, speaking of taking action and making changes, it's my pleasure to introduce to you this young man right here. His name is Jackson Heckenberg. I'm just going to, by way of introducing Jackson, I'd like to share with you how I met Jackson, which was earlier this year. I was interviewing a gentleman, a retired brigadier general by the name of Gregory Mitchell, who is part of our live speaker series. Greg will actually be with us a little over a week from now, and he is the head of the Canadian Veterans Peacekeepers Association of Canada. Pardon me. And Jackson was working with Greg and some other students this summer to gather and collect the stories of peacekeepers through Canada's history. And in meeting Greg, and I was so fascinated by his story, I also was even more fascinated by what Jackson had to share, his own story and his project of remembrance as he moved through the pandemic the last number of years. Jackson engaged in a very special project. And so what I'm going to do is turn off my camera, stop sharing this presentation, and I'm going to invite Jackson in here live to join us. Jackson, maybe you want to turn your camera on. Welcome. All right. And hopefully, although you won't be able to hear them, I'm hoping the students are welcoming you there. So welcome everyone to Jackson Heckenberg. Jackson, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off by saying thank you for having me on here. And it's been a pleasure knowing you for the amount of time that I have. So in every corner of this earth, in countless battles across the seas and skies, our veterans have stood up to tyranny, faced the horrors of war, and demonstrated a level of courage and devotion that is beyond measure so that we can live in freedom. They have carried the weight of our nation's security on their shoulders and have willingly placed themselves in harm's way so that we may continue to live in freedom. It is all too easy as time marches forward to take our precious freedom for granted. We often find ourselves engrossed in the routine of our daily lives, relishing the liberties and opportunities that we enjoy, the gifts bestowed on us by the selflessness of the countless heroes who laid down their lives for us. Yet, we must remember that these freedoms did not magically appear. They were earned through the sacrifice and dedication of those who went before us. In today's world, violence is often glorified to such an extent that we as a society lose sight of the grim realities of war. We must not forget that the veterans that have served have faced unimaginable horrors. They may have come face to face with death or seen their friends being killed. These are the experiences that they have to live with for their entire lives and will continue to pass down and carry with them. And it is our responsibility as a society not to let their sacrifices fade into oblivion. From my own personal journey, I can attest to the profound impact of connecting with veterans through interviews. Prior to this undertaking, I too reserved my commemorations for just Remembrance Day, without fully grasping the depth of sacrifice these heroes made for strangers like you and me, and just people they don't know. And our education system has yet to adapt fully to properly teach students about this. And it has failed to instill a true understanding of these sacrifices that the heroes made. History can serve as our teacher, imparting invaluable lessons, and we must learn from history, not to dwell in the past, but to navigate our future wisely. History teaches us the perils of division and the importance of unity. It reminds us that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. It inspires us to stand up for what is right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Our history shows us the strength of the human spirit, the resilience of individuals and nations, and the power of unity in the face of adversity. It is our duty not to forget the importance of our history and the fundamentals of which our society has been built on, for they are the bedrock upon which our present and future rest. We must never forget the significance of our history and the fundamentals upon which our society is built. Our World War II veterans are rapidly dwindling in number, but they are living symbols of the reasons we speak English. They are the reasons that an entire race of people survived the Holocaust, and they are the reasons that we have the privilege of voicing our opinions and beliefs today. As we stray further away from the First and Second World Wars, people begin to forget the sacrifices that were made in the protection of our freedoms. And as my generation becomes engulfed in violent movies and video games, we begin to lose the reality of war, what war is truly like. And that is why I hope that I can get others interested in learning from the voices of our veterans, and maybe someday they can be used in schools worldwide. Thank you.
And thank you, Jackson. And for anyone out there who hasn't had the opportunity to view the video short, which we've embedded in teachers, that lives on Thinkific. So if you haven't had the opportunity, Jackson shares in a very brief, 5-minute video, his own story, which is really quite fascinating about how he spent the pandemic and got involved. And it was important to me as a lifelong teacher of history that we started out with the voices of young people. Okay, and Jackson, you might not notice it from the picture, but he's younger than the adults. In other words, this is work that can be done by people of all ages, and I'm really inspired by Jackson himself and by so many young people. I participated in this challenge last year as an adult observer and got to see the impact of student thinking in numerous school communities. So I really hope that Jackson has left all of you students with, the conviction that you can have an impact, that you can make a difference by getting interested and getting involved. And we're going to have a second speaker in a few moments who's going to speak to how that might happen and why this is important as well. But for right now, I just want to say thank you, Jackson. You're an inspiration to us here at I Think, and I hope that the students are able to learn from and emulate your example. If all of us even get halfway there, I think we're going to be doing a great job. Okay, let's move into the next part of our launch here. And in terms of designing a Remembrance Day, there are 3 key skills that we want to focus on. And I want to emphasize something specifically here, actually. I'm just going to pop this right back, that these 3 attributes are absolutely fundamental. They are the kind of ground floor of your work through this project. And again, just to be clear, we really feel that this is important, not only for having a clear and accurate historical understanding that opens things up to those traditional stories, as Jackson said, before they fade into oblivion. And again, for our younger students, oblivion means that it's gone, poof, like we have no more memory. And here's the thing, although our veterans may be passing away with the passage of time, by remembering them and by expanding who we remember, and now I'll bring that back, we keep those stories and in a sense, those people alive. So as we move through the challenge, one of your key tasks is going to be to expand your appreciation and understanding of whose stories and how we remember. Secondly, and I've mentioned this again a number of times, and I don't mean to, I'm not repeating it, other than to point out that these terms, these concepts are going to come back up over and over and over. They are embedded in the videos of our speakers who will be part of the live series starting next week. They are part of the video series of Spencer Alexander, who will be joining us in just a few minutes. And they are, in fact, skills that can be brought to bear on your research and your interviews as you move through this challenge. The third component of this challenge, as mentioned earlier, is historical understanding. We want to reflect historical accuracy, and really the first two, expanding and deepening, help us to do that. So the point is here, we can never necessarily have a complete and fully accurate history, but we can work hard, be diligent to expand and deepen and take care in the stories that we tell so that we can fill some of those gaps, fill some of those silences, and expand how we remember. Now, speaking of that, we'll move now into, and here you might take a moment, we'll just take 1 minute with each of these slides. So take a moment now and think, who are all of the learners in your school community? So when we remember as a community and as a school community, many people would think first and foremost about a group that is not pictured here, you, the students, and they'd be right to do so. But if all we looked at, if the only people we considered were students, would that be a complete picture of what makes your school, your community, what it is? No way. And so here you can see we've got vice principals and principals, your school leaders. We have the important support staff, custodians, and office staff. Who else are learners in your school community? Okay. And so while we're looking and listening, we're keeping an open perspective and we're building our empathy skills so that we can start to feel connected to some of those people, because it's important that as we design our Remembrance Day, that in fact, we create conditions that reflect the diversity of people who exist within our community. We also want to consider the stories themselves. So again, let's take a moment, and again, working solo, working with a partner, or working with your whole class. I'm going to stay in silence for a moment or so. There are just 3 groups of people that were impacted by war and conflict. But that is a short list, and there are dozens more that we could add. Who can you add? Okay, so jotting down any final ideas, and then moving to our last group here, we also want to consider people who served in the war effort. And again, traditionally, that would be, veterans, people who have faced combat situations. And it is vital that we remember them, of course. But we also want to look at the other people, the artists, the laborers, the nurses and doctors, the support staff, all of the people who supported the war effort. Take a moment, one final moment here. Who else can you think of who has supported the war effort? And remember, that support might have been at the front, okay, in the theater of war, or it might have been on the home front. And that would mean back in Canada or in countries of origin. Okay. And now, asking this question of ourselves, what does remembering look, feel, and sound like to you? Take a moment of silence to think about this. What are the many ways you remember with your communities? Not just on Remembrance Day, we remember all the time. Think of who, what, and how you remember. And for today, talk to your classmates about what ways to remember are meaningful to them. We all come from different families, from, in a larger sense, from different communities and from different perspectives. We can learn from one another. It's important that we do so. So what ways of remembering are meaningful to them? Why are they meaningful? What is meaningful in your traditions that you can incorporate into Remembrance Day to make it more meaningful for your school community? Okay, now, and I apologize if I'm not giving enough time there, but these are all questions that could be shared within your school and with your classmates and your teachers, even after this session. But before we go on, it is now my pleasure, and I mean my distinct pleasure, to introduce this gentleman. And that's a picture of us sitting together in this past spring. And you can see that there I was listening, and I was listening intently, because when it comes to Spencer Alexander, I have worked as a teacher, as a historian for a quarter century. Rarely, if ever, have I met someone who is so inspiring, whose work is so important for this expanding, deepening, and historical accuracy work that we're doing. Friends, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Spencer Alexander, featured in 3 videos that exist for you to watch. And I implore you, I really encourage you to do so. But for today, let's hear his words, his wisdom live. Spencer, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. Right off the start, I'd like to thank all the veterans and all the military people still in service. Thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of the work the students are doing in regards to Remembrance Day and memorials and remembering war. We have to remember the sacrifice of the Canadians that lost their lives during war times. If we don't, then the loss of those lives are meaningless. They died for their families, for their homes, for the country. They died for us. They all served for a number of different reasons. They served to preserve traditions that they loved and a future that they believed in. They died for Canada as we know it. The meaning of their sacrifice and the remembrance of it rests with us, and especially with the young people, the students. Because it's your continued work with the remembrance of our veterans and carrying on the memory of their sacrifices into the future. It's this that will ensure the continuation of their heroic legacy. Now, Michael spoke earlier about interviewing veterans and how the subject is very sensitive. See, during wartime, individual acts of heroism occur quite often, but very few are ever recorded and receive much recognition. The work you're doing by remembering all who served, you are recognizing the veterans' willingness to endure hardships and overcome their fears so that we could live in peace. The work you're doing by interviewing more veterans about their service, the more stories may be recorded. We have memorial sites. These are places that we can share memory and how we can express ourselves in different ways and interpret loss, to interpret the individual loss of family members and the collective loss of society in Canada as a whole. Well, by formally recognizing the sacrifices of veterans, formally recognizing, I should say, the sacrifices of veterans is not only about remembrance, it also helps us examine and possibly reinterpret the past. And in doing so, we may construct new paths to a peaceful future. For many, war is something that happens through the lens of a camera. You see it on TV, or you get accounts through the words of a journalist. For a lot of us, our closest physical and emotional experience with war may be discovery of wartime memorabilia in family attic. But such items, such as photographs, uniforms, badges, medals, diaries, can seem vague and unconnected to the ones who have discovered them. Not to me, though, because I know how much some of those documents that I have affect me emotionally. So you can just imagine how they affected the people who were the original owners of them. Now, by through the work you're doing and remembering and getting more stories out there, you're also showing gratitude. Your gratitude towards a veteran. I don't know who wrote it, but gratitude is said to be an antidote to negative emotions and a neutralizer of envy, hostility, worry, and irritation. Somebody else also once said gratitude can transform common days into Thanksgivings, turn routine jobs into joy, and change ordinary opportunities into blessings. Now, when I was in Toronto in June, that's when that photograph that where Michael was sitting beside me, there was some, I was impressed with the work the young people were showing me and some of the stories that some of them told me were really touching. Like, for an example, in the poem Flanders Fields, in Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses row on row that mark our place. And in the sky, the lark still bravely singing flies, scarce heard amid the guns below. This, to me, speaks to the resiliency of nature to still provide life during times of war and destruction. And the story some of the young people told me in June demonstrated to me the resiliency and strength of the human spirit to overcome hardships. So once again, thank you for having me. And I hope you continue on remembering these veterans and getting these stories out there. Because eventually the final page in the book of my life is going to be written. And hopefully you will be there to carry this on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Spencer. I can say, and I'm feel privileged to share this. I consider Spencer to be a good friend, and he is a teacher. And I share that specifically to students to say, and not to take anything away from your classroom teachers who are wonderful and important resources on your learning journey. Absolutely. But there are teachers everywhere. There are teachers in our families. There are teachers in our communities. And so for me in my life, I know that for as long as I'm living, I will consider Spencer Alexander to be one of my teachers. And I will continue to draw inspiration from young people like yourselves and like Jackson Heckenberg, who have taken it on themselves to learn and to share these stories and to carry out this work, what Spencer called this important work that you're doing. And it is an awesome responsibility that we're all taking on here, because that, as both of our speakers have shown much more articulately than me, we are engaged in work of remembering to keep these stories and these people and these traditions alive. And I think, and working through the Remembrance Day Challenge this coming month, it's not just the stories that we have that we perhaps already know, but how do we expand into telling different people's stories, different experiences? How do we deepen our knowledge so that we're moving beyond just the names and dates and getting into the deep details? How did people feel? How did they think? What motivated them? What got them up in the morning as they moved through war? And finally, how can we work not just alone, but together as communities to build a greater sense and appreciation of historical accuracy, recognizing that this is a work in progress, always, but building today and into the future new traditions that integrate the best of what we've done and the best of what we might do in the future, to integrate the important stories of our past as Canadians, and perhaps to integrate the stories of newcomers and other experiences of war here and abroad. Everyone, I cannot thank you enough for coming along with us on this journey. So as I said, my name is Michael Alex, and I am here as your primary resource as you and your classmates and your teachers move through this challenge. I congratulate you for being involved, and I really hope that you are able to make the most of what we hope will be a fantastic 2023 Remembrance Day Challenge Kit experience. And that concludes our launch event for today. So I'm going to thank all of you for coming. I'm going to encourage teachers to continue these conversations within your classes as we move through the rest of this week. Just by way of reminder, you might share and work, and this would vary depending on age level of the students with whom you're working. The 3 Spencer videos, I call them the Spencer videos, the videos featuring Spencer Alexander, which live on the Thinkific platform associated with the challenge. Each of those 3 videos speak individually and together to expanding, deepening, and working with historical accuracy. I also hope that you have the opportunity, either live or to take in the taped, if not possible to come live, of our live speakers series, which will begin a week from tomorrow. And we have a lineup of 6 different speakers, 2 a day on Thursday and Friday of next week, and then the following Tuesday. And we sincerely hope that you can join us for that. And before we lose you today, I really want to encourage teachers and students, as you're watching the videos, and that's probably not until next Monday, okay? It's the early part of next week that we'll get into previewing these video shorts, which are truly short, like 5 minutes. A couple of them are a little bit longer, but all hopefully very, very interesting, and lots of prompts to spark your thinking as you move into looking at how you remember in your communities. If you generate questions, and here I'm speaking specifically to students, gather those questions up, pass them to your teacher. Teachers, share them with me, send them by email. I will get them to our live speakers. Of course, we're gonna take questions live and in person during the sessions next week, but those questions that come early, I'll make sure that they get to our speakers, okay? I cannot stress how excited we are that you're with us. I thank everyone for coming, and on behalf of I Think and our larger team, we thank you and have a wonderful day, lest we forget.